the 14 fastest shrinking U.S. cities, where everyone is fleeing, so you know how people are always talking about which cities are booming. Austin's growing. Phoenix is exploding. Everyone wants to move to Nashville. Yeah, well, nobody's talking about the other side of that coin. The cities that are actively shrinking, not slowly declining over decades. Actually hemorrhaging population right now. Thousands of people a year just packing up and leaving. St. Louis lost over 21,000 people between 2020 and 2024. That's the worst decline of any major American city. Detroit's down by 2/3 from its peak. Buffalo lost half its population. These aren't small towns. These are cities that used to have nearly 1 million people, and now they're struggling to keep 300,000. And before you think this is just some inevitable post-industrial decline that nobody could have prevented, let me tell you something. These cities didn't just get unlucky. They made specific choices, bad choices, for decades. And now they're dealing with the consequences while everyone pretends it's somehow surprising. That people don't want to live in places with terrible schools, high crime, collapsing infrastructure, and no jobs. Let's talk about it. Here's what's actually happening with America's shrinking cities, and why it matters even if you don't live in one. The Rust Belt got absolutely destroyed starting in the 1970s and 80s. Manufacturing moved overseas. Steel mills closed, auto plants shut down, and entire regional economies that were built around those industries just collapsed. But here's the thing. Some cities adapted. Pittsburgh reinvented itself around healthcare and technology. Columbus diversified its economy. Even Cleveland has managed to stabilize its population after decades of decline. The cities that are still shrinking fast in 2026 are the ones that never figured out how to replace what they lost. They're still waiting for the factories to come back. Still trying to manage a city infrastructure built for twice as many people. Still raising taxes on a shrinking base of residents who can't afford to leave yet. And it creates this vicious cycle. People leave because there aren't good jobs. That means less tax revenue, which means worse schools and services, which makes more people leave. Repeat until you're Detroit. According to recent census data, St. Louis alone lost 21,700 residents between 2020 and 2024. That's the steepest decline among major U.S. cities, even worse than San Francisco during its post-pandemic exodus. These aren't abstract statistics. This is 20,000 families who looked around their city and decided anywhere else was better. And they're not wrong. Let me walk you through 14 cities where population is actively collapsing, and I'm going to tell you exactly why people are fleeing. Number 14. Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham's been losing population steadily for decades. But the pace has picked up recently as people realize the city's economy never really recovered from the collapse of its steel industry. The city peaked at over 300,000 people in 1960. Now it's under 200,000. That's a third of the population gone. Birmingham's problem is it never diversified beyond heavy industry. When U.S. steel and other manufacturers started declining, there was nothing to replace them. The city tried to pivot to healthcare and banking, and there's some of that, but not enough to stop the bleeding. If you live in Birmingham, you're dealing with high property taxes, aging infrastructure, and limited job opportunities outside of a few specific sectors. That's not a recipe for population growth. Number 13. Shreveport. Louisiana. Shreveport lost its economic foundation when oil and gas jobs dried up. The city's been declining for years, and young professionals keep leaving for better opportunities. Population dropped from over 200,000 in 1980 to around 180,000 now. The unemployment rate runs higher than the national average. Crime is an issue, and there's just not much reason to stay if you don't have deep family ties. Shreveport's sitting on a lot of vacant properties and closed businesses. The city's trying to revitalize, but it's an uphill battle when your main industry is gone and nothing's replacing it. Number 12. Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown is the textbook Rust Belt collapse. Steel industry dies. 40,000 jobs disappear. Population drops by more than half. The city went from over 170,000 people in 1960 to under 60,000 today. That's a catastrophic decline. Youngstown has been trying to adapt to its new reality by actually planning for a smaller population instead of pretending growth is coming back. It's called shrinking cities planning, basically acknowledging that you're never getting back to peak population and designing the city for fewer people. It's pragmatic, but it's also depressing because it means accepting that the city's best days are behind it. Number 11, Flint. Michigan. Flint will forever be known for the water crisis, and that legacy has made population decline even worse. The city lost over half its population since 1960. It's down from 200,000 to under 90,000 now, and every time people think about moving to Flint, they remember the water crisis and decide literally anywhere else would be better. Flint's trying to recover. The pipes have been replaced. The water tests clean, but trust is gone. And the broader economic problems that existed before the water crisis are still there. If you're in Flint, you're dealing with high poverty, limited jobs, and a city government that's been in financial crisis for decades. Number 10, Toledo. Ohio. Toledo is another Ohio city that got crushed by deindustrialization and never fully recovered. Population peaked around 500,000 in 1970. Now it's under 270,000. The city lost over 40% of its people. Toledo has Jeep and some other manufacturing, but nothing like what it used to have. The job market is weak. Young people leave for Columbus or other cities with better opportunities. The city's been working on revitalization, particularly downtown, but neighborhoods outside the core are struggling with vacancy and decline. Number 9, Dayton, Ohio. Dayton hit peak population around 160,000 in 1960. It's now under 140,000. That's almost half the population gone. Dayton was built around manufacturing and lost most of it. The city does have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which provides some economic stability, but it's not enough to reverse the decline. Crime is higher than the national average. Poverty is high. Schools are struggling. If you don't have a specific reason to be in Dayton, there's not much pulling you there. Number 8, Gary, Indiana. Gary might be the most depressing example on this list. The city was literally created by U.S. Steel in 1906. When steel collapsed, Gary collapsed with it. Peak population was over 170,000 in 1960. Now it's under 70,000. The city lost over 60% of its people. Gary's crime rate is one of the worst in the nation. The unemployment rate is over 13%. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned. Thousands of vacant structures. If you drive through Gary, you'll see block after block of boarded-up buildings and empty lots. It looks like a city that lost a war. Number 7, Camden, New Jersey. Camden's been dealing with extreme poverty and economic collapse for decades. The city lost most of its manufacturing base and never replaced it. Population dropped from over 120,000 in 1950 to under 70,000 now. Crime has been off the charts for years, though recent efforts have improved things slightly. Camden's right across the river from Philadelphia, which makes the comparison even more stark. You can see a major city with economic activity from a city that feels abandoned. Number 6, Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson's dealing with infrastructure failure, population loss, and economic stagnation all at the same time. The city's population has been flat or declining for years. The water crisis made national news. Aging pipes, poor management, complete system failures. Young families are leaving for suburbs or other cities. The poverty rate is high. Job opportunities are limited. And the infrastructure problems make it feel like the city can't provide basic services. Number 5, Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore has been losing population steadily for decades, down from over 900,000 at its peak to under 600,000 now. The city is dealing with crime, poverty, aging infrastructure, and a declining industrial base. Neighborhoods that used to be thriving are now full of vacant row houses. Baltimore has tried various revitalization efforts. Some neighborhoods like Harbor East have seen investment, but large swaths of the city continue to decline. For every success story in Baltimore, there are 5 blocks of boarded-up buildings. Number 4, Buffalo, New York. Buffalo lost nearly half its population since its peak in 1950. The city went from 580,000 people to around 170,000. The collapse of steel and manufacturing gutted Buffalo's economy. The St. Lawrence Seaway replaced the Erie Canal, taking away Buffalo's transportation advantage. The weird thing about Buffalo is there are actually signs of recovery. Zillow named it one of the hottest property markets for 2025. Some young people are moving there for cheap housing, but the city's still dealing with decades of decline. Infrastructure is old, poverty is high, and a lot of neighborhoods are still losing people. Number 3. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland's population collapsed from over 900,000 in 1950 to around 360,000 today. That's over 60% gone. The city's finally stabilized. In 2024, Cleveland actually celebrated not losing more residents, which tells you how low expectations have gotten. Cleveland's been trying to reinvent itself with healthcare and some tech. Neighborhoods like Tremont have attracted young professionals. The city's affordable compared to coastal metros, but the damage from decades of decline is still visible everywhere. Huge swaths of the east side are still depopulated. Poverty rate is over 36%. Infrastructure is crumbling. Number 2. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is the poster child for urban collapse in America. The city lost over 2/3 of its population since its peak in 1950. Peak population was nearly 2 million. Now it's around 670,000. That's over 1 million people gone. Detroit's story is deindustrialization in its purest form. Auto industry dominated everything. When it started declining and outsourcing, Detroit had nothing else to fall back on. The city went bankrupt in 2013. Thousands of abandoned buildings. Entire neighborhoods basically returned to nature. The strange thing about Detroit is it's actually been stabilizing recently. For the first time since the 1950s, population grew slightly in the last couple years. Downtown and Midtown are seeing investment, but huge parts of the city are still in free fall. The east side is still losing people. Services are still terrible in a lot of neighborhoods. Property taxes are crushing homeowners. Detroit's trying to adapt to being a smaller city, but it's built for 2 million people and is less than 700,000. That math doesn't work. Number 1. St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis gets the number 1 spot because it currently has the worst population decline of any major American city. The city lost over 21,000 residents between 2020 and 2024. In 2024 alone, St. Louis lost over 3,000 people. That's the steepest decline in the nation. St. Louis peaked at 856,000 people in 1950. Now it's under 280,000. The city lost 65% of its population. And here's what makes St. Louis particularly brutal. The metro area is actually growing slightly, mainly from immigration. But the city proper is hemorrhaging people. Young families are fleeing to the suburbs for better schools and lower crime. The city is losing its tax base. Services are declining. Crime is still a major problem even though officials claim it's improving. St. Louis has some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in America. The poverty rate is over 21%. The school system is struggling. Infrastructure is old and failing. The city's median household income is $53,000 compared to over $81,000 in the metro area. People who can afford to leave are leaving. And the demographic trends are terrifying. The birth rate is cratering. The city's losing families with children. What's left is an aging population, high poverty, and not enough economic activity to sustain city services. St. Louis is basically in a death spiral. Fewer people means less tax revenue. Less tax revenue means worse services. Worse services means more people leave. And the cycle keeps going. So what's the broader picture here? These shrinking cities are dealing with a problem that doesn't have an easy solution. You can't just rebuild a regional economy that was based on industries that are never coming back. Some cities like Pittsburgh managed to reinvent themselves. Others like Detroit are trying. But a lot of these places are stuck in this terrible middle ground where they're too big to just disappear, but too broken to actually function well. The people who stay are often the ones who can't afford to leave. That creates concentrated poverty, which makes all the other problems worse. And the political response has mostly been denial. Cities keep trying to lure people back with incentives or marketing campaigns. But you can't market your way out of high crime and failing schools. Here's what you need to understand about shrinking cities. If you live in one of these places, you're not crazy for thinking about leaving. The problems are real, the decline is real, and it's probably going to continue. That doesn't mean these cities are all doomed. Some of them will stabilize, some might even grow again eventually, but it's going to take decades of hard work and probably some luck. If you're thinking about moving to one of these cities because housing is cheap, understand what you're getting into. Yes, you can buy a house for under $100,000 in a lot of these places, but there's a reason it's cheap. You're betting on a turnaround that might not happen in your lifetime. You're accepting worse schools, higher crime, and limited job opportunities in exchange for affordable housing. That trade makes sense for some people. Remote workers who don't need the local job market. People with deep family ties. Folks who genuinely love their city and want to be part of the solution. But don't move to a shrinking city thinking it's some kind of housing hack. It's cheap because demand is low. And demand is low for very specific reasons. America's shrinking cities are a massive economic and social challenge that we're mostly just ignoring. These were once some of the most important cities in the country. Detroit built the cars that won World War II. St. Louis was a major transportation and manufacturing hub. Cleveland was a powerhouse of industry, and now they're shadows of what they were. Not because of some natural disaster or unavoidable tragedy, but because industries moved, and nobody figured out what comes next. The people who stayed are trying to make it work with a fraction of the resources, and a broken infrastructure built for twice as many people. That's not sustainable. Some of these cities will find a way forward. Maybe Detroit really does reinvent itself. Maybe St. Louis figures out how to stop the bleeding. Maybe Cleveland's stabilization turns into actual growth. But a lot of these places are going to keep shrinking. The jobs aren't coming back. Young people aren't staying. And at some point, you have to ask whether it makes sense to keep trying to maintain a city for $300,000 that was built for $1 million. So here's my question for you. If you live in one of these shrinking cities, are you staying or planning to leave? And if you left one of these places, what was the final straw that made you go? Let me know in the comments. And if you know someone who's dealing with this in their hometown, send them this video. They're not alone. Subscribe if you want more brutally honest analysis of what's actually happening to American cities. I'll see you in the next one.